the things that comes up a lot. I feel like a lot of Sunday school stories, we have this idea of faith. Like all of these characters that their driving point was faith. You think about Noah building the ark and it taking years and years to build the ark and everybody criticizing him and ridiculing him, like, why are you building this giant boat? You are a psycho. But he knew that God was calling him to do something. He was told to do this, and so he continued to persevere in that and had faith that there was a reason for it. Or you think about Daniel in the lion's den having faith that he will be safe, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or if you're cultured, Rakshak and Benny, facing the fiery furnace and knowing that God will be with them. We just see this rock-solid faith in what God is doing in their lives. And it's true for the character that I chose to look at today. And not only faith in God, but why I chose this story is that this person shows faith in God, but also a level of faith and confidence in themselves and who they are. And as I was looking at that and thinking about our seniors and thinking about, because of who I am and what I do, thinking about our students, I thought that there was a lot of things that ring true in this story for our students. But the cool thing is, and why God is awesome, is that the things that apply to our students also apply to all of you. And so there are things that you can take away from it as well. So if you want to follow along in this story, we're going to be turning to the book of 1 Samuel. We're going back to the Old Testament. We've been hanging out in the New Testament a lot during this series. But we are going to the Old Testament, 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting right there at verse 1. And it says this, it says, "Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Soko and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his leg he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, 'Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us.' Then the Philistine said, 'This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other.' On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified." So if you haven't figured out yet, the story that we're talking about is David and Goliath. And so this story starts off with these armies on 2 hills with this valley in between, and Goliath, this massive guy, steps forward and calls out the army of Israel. And he uses this word, he says, "I defy the armies of Israel." And that's how it's translated in English, but the Hebrew word, this Hebrew word that is translated as defy, like it's a big insult. He's basically stepping forward and saying, like, I disgrace you, I cast all kinds of shame on you, like this is the highest level of disrespect is what I am sending your way to the army of Israel. And he establishes this idea of like champion combat, of you send one guy to face me and whoever wins, like we don't have to have this whole battle between our armies, like we can save a lot of lives and it can just be one-on-one, whoever wins, wins. And yet they were terrified. And so now we get another character introduced to the story, carrying on in verse 12. It says, "Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand." So David's brothers went off to war, and David kind of works as a messenger, running back and forth because he's still got sheep to look after. And so for 40 days and in the morning and in the evening, Goliath does this little dance where he comes out and he calls out everybody and he says, come fight me somebody, and nobody steps up to the plate. And so this continues to happen for 40 days, and at some point, Jesse, David's father, says, hey, I want you to head out to the front lines to your brothers and take them some food and take some food to their commander and make sure they're all right, find out what's going on, check in on them, and then bring word back to me because I want to know how they're doing. And so he sends David out to check on his brothers. And as he's there, he's talking with them, hey, how are you doing? Here's some food that Dad sent for you. How are you doing? I need to tell him what's going on. And it says here in verse 23, it says, as he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. But David asked the man standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? That David's not having any of this. He's standing there, he hears these insults. He says, who is this guy? Like, why does he get to stand up and insult our God and insult our army, talk all this smack, and we're just going to sit here and let it happen? Like, why is nobody stepping up to the plate? What is going on here? David's not going to stand for it. And it goes on. He says, you know what? I will go. I'll go kill him. Like, I'll step up and do it. And it goes on, and it says in verse 31, it says, what David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. So this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. So Saul looks at David and he says, you can't do this. Look at you. You're small, you're young. Like, why do you think that you can take on this giant? And I preached a message way back, I think it was the first time I preached here at Crossbridge, about people or yourself trying to disqualify you from what God is calling you to do. And that's what Saul is doing here. He's looking at David and he's saying, you can't do this. Look at you. You're young. You can't do this. And for our students in the room or for anybody, like, it's true for all of you that there are going to be things in life that you feel called to do that God is pushing you towards, and there are going to be people who look at you and say, you can't do that. They're going to question your motives. They're going to question your ability. They're going to give you all the reasons why you'll fail or why it won't work out, why you can't do something. People will try to disqualify you. But like David, you can have confidence in where you have been and who you are and how God has designed you. That Saul looks at him and says, you can't do this. You're a young man. You're just a young boy. And Goliath has been a warrior since his youth. And so David thinks about it. He says, wait, if I'm a young boy and Goliath started as a young boy, then who's to say I can't do this? Like, he started killing when he was a kid. I could take him on right now. And he understands where he's been. That he said, you know, I'm a shepherd. I look after these sheep, and there's a lot of big things that want to eat these sheep. I have to deal with lions and bears. When they come and take away my sheep, I fight them off. I kill them. I take them on. I've killed all of these things, so he's no different. That he is confident and he understands where he has been, his experiences, and what God has already done in his life. And he knows that if God was with him then he's going to be with me when I go forward to take on whatever that is in front of me, whether it's a giant, whether it's whatever it is in your life that you are facing, that you need to tackle, that you are worried about, or that somebody is telling you that you don't have what it takes to get through or to take on, understanding that God has done it before and he'll do it again. So we move on. In verse 38, it says, "Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. 'I cannot go in these,' he said to Saul, 'because I am not used to them.' So he took them off." So people will try to force you into the image of what they have for you or what they think you need to be to do what you have to do. They have an image in their head of this is what a Christian looks like, this is what a good person looks like, this is what you have to do or what you have to be in order to fulfill what is right or to be a good person. As Saul says, the only way that you can take this guy on is if you take all of these weapons, put on this armor, like you have to look the part if you're gonna go fight this guy. But once again, David has confidence in who he is. He says, this doesn't fit me. I'm not this guy. Like he looks in the mirror and this armor, tries to walk around, he can't move in it. And he says, this is not who I am. I am not this big warrior man. I'm a guy who looks after sheep. But I'm also a guy who's not going to stand for my God being insulted. But the truth is, you do not have to look like what other people expect of you. The only opinion that matters when it comes to who you are and how you live is God's. And if you are in tune with who he is calling you to be, in tune with how he has designed you, then you can shut out all the voices who are telling you to do this and do that and look this way or be this way and just be true to who you are and how you were designed. Verse 44 says, "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your..." Oh, sorry. We're going to skip a little bit forward. This is as David is face to face with Goliath now. He comes to the battlefield. He says, you know what? I can't take this armor. I can't take this sword with me. I'm going to just go and be myself, and I'm going to take on this giant with what I know how to do. And so Goliath calls to him. He says, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." But David replies and says to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." I don't remember this part from Sunday school. I don't remember the little cartoon David cutting off Goliath's head and feeding the armies to the wild animals. But this once again goes to illustrate David's confidence. That he knows who he's got behind him, and he knows that whatever threats Goliath is making towards him are just going to get turned right around back at him, because as big as Goliath thinks he is, as much armor, as much weapons as he brings with him, that God is bigger than all of that. And so he says, yeah, you have sword, you have spear, you have javelin, you come at me with all these things, but I'm coming at you with the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel. And he's much bigger than your giant spear. So now we get to the fight, verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. It's a very quick battle. But I want to circle back to a verse that I skipped. See, as David is leaving the tent, leaving Saul's camp, after taking off all of this armor, he says, I can't take this. It's not for me. I'm not taking all this weaponry with me. I'm just going to go do this. It says here in verse 40, He took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. So he tosses away all of these weapons, tosses away the armor, and he steps out into the stream and he pulls out 5 stones. And that's what he takes with him to take on Goliath, which in itself is a cool thing to note, that he chose to take some rocks with him to fight this guy. But what I think is even cooler is that he pulled 5 stones out of the stream, but he only needed 1. The first stone that he pulls out of his pouch and throws at Goliath drops him to the ground. But he was prepared to take multiple shots. And so what I want to encourage you with this morning, especially you students, but once again, this is something for everybody, is that your first stone doesn't have to be the one that hits. See, a lot of us step out into life and we think we know what our calling is. We think we know what God is calling us to do. And we get a few years down the road and we realize this is not where I'm supposed to be. And we have to pull some 180s and figure out where God is going. And you are encouraged to have multiple stones in your bag ready to go. That just because the first one misses, just because you went down the road and realized that this is not what God is calling you to do, doesn't mean that your life has been wasted. It doesn't mean that you are irredeemable or that you've made this big mistake and nothing can be right now. Just pull the next stone out and figure out where you're going next. Verse 50. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. And after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. And when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. And David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem and put the Philistine's weapons in his own tent. So, once again, I don't remember this part, but what we see here is that exactly what David said would happen, happened. That when you approach a situation with faith, when you stand before the giant and you have faith that you will overcome it, that God will come through. So he takes Goliath's head and he takes his weapons and he uses them as trophies and as proof. He sends it. It says he took the hero or the Philistine's head and he took it back to Jerusalem as proof that God is bigger, that you were all scared of this giant, but look at what God did because of the faith that I had. See, all of the things that you overcome, all of the giants that you face in life, as you overcome them, they become symbols, they become trophies that you can turn back and look at as the proof of what God can do. Verse 55, it says, as Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, Abner, whose son is that young man? Who is that boy? Abner replied, as surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know. See, I wanted to note this verse because it's crazy to me that Saul stood before David and told him he couldn't do it, told him he didn't have what it takes, said, you can't do this thing, and then had the nerve to ask who he was. That there are people in your life telling you that you can't do something, telling you that you're not good enough, telling you that you don't have what it takes, and they don't even know who you are or whose you are. There are a lot of voices in our lives that shouldn't mean anything. They don't know your story. They don't know your experiences. They don't know who you are or where you have been, and yet they tell you that you can't do something, that you aren't good enough for what God is trying to do through you. So I encourage you to listen to the voice that matters. I love, one of my favorite worship songs is from Elevation. It's the song Same God. We actually sang it last week. And that line says, I may not face Goliath, but I've got my own giants. That this is an extreme story. I don't think any of you are leaving today to take on a 9-foot-tall monster man. But there are huge things in front of you. Whether it's financial stress, whether it's broken relationships, whether it's addiction, whether it's depression, whatever it is that is standing in front of you, the giant that seems unbeatable, I encourage you to remember what God did here. The title of that song is Same God, and it says that you are the same God. Our God doesn't change. The God that showed up for David, that drove that stone to kill the giant, is the same God that will show up for you, whatever it is that you're facing. There is nothing bigger than God. Whatever it is that you're facing, it's not bigger than him. To circle back and quote the great VeggieTales once more, God is bigger than the boogeyman, okay? There is nothing that you will face that God can't handle, which means there's nothing that you will face that you can't handle if you take him with you. And remember to listen to the voice that matters, that knows who you are. Don't listen to the voices that tell you that you're not enough, that tell you that you can't do something. Listen to the voice that called you and that tells you that you are the one designed to take this on. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for the opportunity to come together to worship you. Thank you that you give us the opportunity to carry your name, to tackle the giants in front of us, that we can go with the confidence of knowing that we are yours and that you have designed us to face whatever it is in front of us, to face whatever it is that you've called us to. There are big things in this world. There are hurts all around the world that you are calling us to be the solution for. You're calling us to take action, and we just pray that you remind us that you have prepared us for this. God, help us to have clarity to hear your voice above all others, to know, as the subject of the story we just learned about, as he wrote, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that we were designed to love you, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.